How does this make you feel? Right now, you're in a therapy session. Do you feel better? Less stressed? It's called nature therapy.
Before I started training to be a counsellor, I'd suffered with anxiety, and it was about a year I felt crippled by it, and slowly over time I got better. But I would sit and meditate. I knew meditation was going to be good for me, but I did not find it challenging. I struggled so much with it. Then I found out about mindfulness in nature.
This is The Why Factor on the BBC World Service. I'm Jordan Dunbar, and today I'm asking, why does nature calm anxiety? I'm in an ancient forest in North Wales in the UK, and I'm not alone. With me is Kendall, who's a therapist who does things differently. She brings her patients outside into the woods to connect with their primal past. And there's not a leather couch in sight.
Cortisol is the stress hormone. So as a hunter-gatherer, we would have had cortisol rush through our bodies when danger approached.
So if you need to fight a woolly mammoth or whatever it was about, or a bear.
It's all about fight, flight or freeze.
Pretty useful back then.
Absolutely.
Lee and her husband James, a wilderness instructor, have begun offering mindfulness in nature courses based on utilising our instinctual hunter-gatherer skills we haven't had to use for thousands of years. In evolutionary terms, we've only been living in towns or cities for less than 0.01% of human existence. Lee and James believe our brains haven't had a chance to catch up with modern life.
Now we find ourselves in our modern life having lots of little stresses all day long, whether it's a traffic jam, whether it's emails pinging constantly.
So we're reacting hunter-gatherer style, but there is no bear or wolf.
We're not running away. We're not burning off that energy and then calming down with a community around us that make us feel safe.
And I suppose then if you've got an anxiety disorder, it's even worse because your reaction to fight or flight is 10 or 20 times what someone without anxiety would have.
Absolutely. So 2 hours in the forest for someone who suffers with anxiety is far better than struggling to sit in a room and empty your thoughts. You kind of need to embrace your anxiety, accept it's there, and just walk out in nature. And you do that regularly enough, nature will absorb that energy.
Can you hear that?
Yeah, it's beautiful.
It started to rain. That's amazing.
Anxiety is one of the most diagnosed mental illnesses in the world, now overtaking depression in the West. There's a growing movement of psychologists, scientists and therapists claiming that the disconnect from nature is making the condition worse. Constant communication, 24-hour news, traffic, crowds, blank walls, concrete, glass and steel skyscrapers are surrounding us as our lives grow ever more hectic.
Scientists have issued their starkest warning yet about the danger of climate change.
Slaughtered by a deranged gunman, there have
On
been
Tuesday, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio declared a public health emergency following an outbreak in Brooklyn.
We'll all have experienced being anxious, that feeling of dread or stress in the chest, the increase in heartbeat, sweating and inability to think straight, before an exam, giving a presentation, checking your bank account. But an anxiety disorder is having that sensation nearly constantly for over 6 months. It's like hearing the music for the final boss in a video game, but the final boss never shows up. Anxiety is treated with medication and talking therapies, as well as mindfulness or meditation. Mindfulness has become a big deal, with millions of people around the world downloading guides to try and calm their thoughts with their phone. It's created a $1 billion industry. But there is another type of therapy that can't be downloaded.
Ecopsychology is that field of psychology that's concerned with the human and nature relationship.
Patricia Hasbach is a clinical psychotherapist and ecotherapist based in Oregon in the northwest of the United States. So you would actually prescribe to patients that In the same way that some people get prescribed antidepressants or sedatives, you would prescribe to them to go out into nature.
We literally call it a nature prescription. And it's something that's not just done because it feels good or nature's a pretty backdrop, but there's a lot of thought into what kind of interaction with nature is going to be most potent for the issues or concerns that client is working on. I often think about ecotherapy as another tool in the therapist's toolbox. It's not a panacea, it's not going to erase somebody's pain or grief, but it is a powerful tool. You know, traditionally, therapy has stopped at the urban boundary.
I know what you're thinking. This is all hippie, tree-hugging, middle-class garbage. But as someone who struggles with anxiety and doesn't get much peace out of those popular mindfulness apps, I want to know more. Being in the forest and away from the city life definitely did make me calmer, but why? I wanted to start at the beginning, so I talked to Birgitta Gatersleben, an environmental psychologist at the University of Surrey, England.
In 1984, which is sort of when it formally became much better known, a piece of research was published in Science, where a researcher called Roger Ulrich evaluated hospital records over a 10-year period, I think, and looked at the difference in hospital nurses' notes, recovery from gallbladder surgery, and how post-op stays in hospital, and found that there was a significant difference in all those outcomes between people who could see 3 trees through their window versus those who couldn't see any nature through their window. So the only difference between those conditions over that long period of time was that some people could see nature through the windows and others couldn't.
Think about that. Patients seeing nature actually healed faster. Those patients left hospital much quicker than the unlucky ones who couldn't see any trees. That study led to a lot more attention being paid to what nature could do, not just for our physical health, but our mental health as well. Rachel and Stephen Kaplan are professors specialising in environmental psychology at the University of Michigan, and they're known for developing attention restoration theory. In their book published in the 1980s, The Experience of Nature, A Psychological Perspective, the theory suggests that people can concentrate better after spending time in nature, or even just looking at scenes of nature. It allows your brain to give effortless attention to what they call soft fascinations. This gives the brain a break to meander, unlike the focused attention needed when crossing a street. There are 2 reasons why researchers think being in nature is important to our mental health.
The first one is sort of associated with this biophilia approach, that it's just something that's built in and it's an emotional positive response. Biophilia, very briefly, is really the sort of innate positive response that people have with life and lifelike features. The idea that nature reminds us of life, and if we are exposed to natural elements, then our sort of negative feelings get almost immediately replaced with positive emotions. So we have this sort of innate, built-in positive response to life and lifelike features.
So when you say innate, that's as in deep within us?
Yes.
Naturally there?
Yeah. Something that we almost can't really control, if you like. It's something that just happens without us being even aware of it, or beyond our control. If we see some water or healthy water or green natural environments that are full of life, then we immediately experience positive. And the other one is a more cognitive theory, which suggests that we all have, if you like, a barrel of directed attention that we use in order to cope with daily life. So much of what we do is sort of fascinating, innately fascinating, but we have to ignore it because we have to concentrate on our task. Nature has the ability to support recovery of directed attention fatigue more than just rest, because there are soft, fascinating qualities in nature. Those are things that, even if you walk down the road, you need to ignore lots of stimuli and just concentrate on whether there's a car coming so you don't get knocked over. So that's directed attention is what we need to function, basically. But that storage of directed attention is susceptible to fatigue, so it can run out.
Once our directed attention store runs out, we get tired, we can't concentrate, we get irritable and more anxious. To recover that, we can use nature.
Nature has the ability to support recovery of directed attention fatigue more than just rest, because there are soft, fascinating qualities in nature. Those are things that attract our attention, but in a sort of bottom-up way, which helps us then rest our directed attention, so fatigue. So if you think about flames in a fire, or looking at the waves in the sea, or the leaves the sort of flickering, moving in the trees, those are things that you can just stare at.
These objects let our attention drift away and recharge our direct attention stores. So your attention is on something they think is healing, and you find these soft focus objects most in nature. But what about places without access to nature? Snake River Correctional Facility is in Oregon in the United States. I can think of few other places on Earth more disconnected from nature. It holds some of the most dangerous prisoners in the state at maximum security and sometimes alone in their cells. Our ecotherapist Patricia Hasbach was asked to go to the prison's IMU, or Intensive Management Unit, and see what they could do with elements of nature to help the prisoners held in solitary confinement.
Everything was very clean, everything was very bright, primarily bright white.
But no green. Prisoners would never see another living thing other than guards and inmates walking past. They only rarely get a glimpse at the sky. They'll never see a plant or an animal. Her team was asked to work with two wings in the prison. Prisoners of one wing would have no nature as a control in the experiment. Prisoners in the other wing would have videos of nature projected on the wall of the small gym they were allowed to go to once a day.
There was a variety of videos. Many of them showed different biomes like forests, oceans, beaches, cloud fly-throughs. There was one that was just like a fireplace with fire burning in a fireplace. There was one particular video that was the most requested video of all, and that particular one showed a real diverse mixture of landscapes and animal life, really minimal human presence.
The results showed that in this instance, even an artificial version of nature could help soothe the prisoners.
What we found was that exposure to the videos had a positive impact on the inmates' emotional state. Nearly half of the inmates agreed or strongly agreed on the surveys that they felt calmer, they felt less irritated after watching the videos, and that mood was sustained even after they left the exercise yard. And many of them talked about how those scenes helped them go to sleep at night, that they were able to self-soothe through remembering some of those scenes from the nature videos. The other piece I found interesting was later in our surveys we asked what their preferences were in terms of nature sounds, music, or silence, and overwhelmingly nature sounds was preferred.
Violent incidents went down, and the prison guards were so impressed by the results that they started using the nature videos as a preventative measure.
When they could watch for precursor behaviors like rocking or pacing in his cell before it got to a place of a potentially violent outburst by the inmate. So they actually used it as an intervention tool.
Back in the Welsh forest, I'm about to begin my nature therapy.
So I very often get people to take their shoes and socks off.
Okay.
The earth gives off...
Hold on, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to
Yeah,
slip
do
these off.
it.
Slip off my trainers,
Yeah,
which are completely inappropriate for the woodland.
yeah.
Okay.
Are your socks cotton?
No, I don't think so.
Well, you have to take them off.
Okay, can I
Yeah.
get you to...
Yeah. But the feet are perfect conductors of this electrical charge that the earth gives off. Okay?
I can feel a lot of twigs and leaves, and it's
Now,
quite cool.
what science is saying is that you should sleep better tonight for earthing.
Because I've taken my shoes and socks
absolutely.
off.
It's one of the biggest benefits from barefoot walking. Very mindfully now walk barefoot. What you are thinking about is how your feet feel on the floor.
Okay.
What muscles are being
Rather
used.
than worrying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't push anything away, just focus on your feet. Which is a lot easier than stop thinking about the things we don't want to think about. And you have to be mindful because actually you could hurt yourself. There's some sharp twigs there, you know?
I have quite strong feet.
And you would slow it right down and you would notice any muscles perhaps in the ankle and the shin and the knee and all these things. And you just totally absorb yourself in the moment. Look at that mushroom.
The thinking behind James, my wilderness instructor's caveman therapy, is that we belong in nature. It's where we come from. So James is teaching me to make fire using just my hands and some wooden tools from the forest.
We are out in a beautiful environment which is very calming, which doesn't demand anything of us. We've got lovely natural sounds around us. We're doing activities that we would have done as cavemen, foraging, building shelters, sourcing firewood, and these are all activities which require us to really zone into what we're doing in the here and now. There are a few things to remember here. Doing fire by friction, which we're going to try here with a fire bow, and this drill is going to spin round on the cord of the bow as we bow our hands back and forth. Think of a violinist, who knows, maybe even meditate while the bow is going back and forth.
Okay.
City living is the reality for the majority of the planet. This increasing disconnect from nature isn't encouraging optimism in Harini Negrenda, a professor of sustainability at Azim Premji University in Bangalore, India. She's worried about India's dramatic urbanization and its effect on its citizens.
India is urbanizing exceedingly fast. It's still a country that is only 1/3 urban, but projections indicate that it's going to become more than 50% urban in the next maybe 15 years, 20 years. And that urbanization is everywhere. It's the large cities growing even larger, but it's all the small villages becoming smaller towns and small towns becoming larger towns. So you now see that there's very little parts of India that are left untouched.
In the West, we see nature as a place of calm and recreation, but in India, their relationship with nature is more profound.
If you look at the varieties of world religions that you have in India, you know, Hinduism, but also Buddhism, Sikhism, Jainism, Islam, Christianity, all of them consider nature to be sacred in some form or another. But the aspect of the spiritual and the sacred is very much there in all of these places. So for instance, we have interviewed people of original erstwhile villages that were next to lakes, and they had their lake goddesses and gods at the lake. And now the lake has been recreationally landscaped with a fence and paths for walking and jogging, but there's no place for their gods. You know, their sacred memories or their memories of the landscape are completely different from the lake that they see around them. And they're very clear that it does not have the same kind of sense of meaning to them that it once had.
The new Indian cities and the extensions to the old ones rarely include greenery. They have the classic tall skyscrapers, wide roads, and the native plants and lakes often get built on.
We've talked to people who visit lakes and parks, but we've also talked to street vendors. We have a long-term study looking at street vendors and how they relate to trees. And so we've talked to people in slums, we've talked to people in high-end apartments. And whatever their profession, whatever their economic background, whatever their cultural affinity, they all use the word stress repeatedly. And they say that when they're close to places of nature, such as a lake or a tree on a road, they feel a sense of security, a sense of satisfaction, a sense of peace. So the street vendors frequently use the word sukoon, which is a sense of calm and a sense of homecoming. And in fact, the trees are something that is extremely sought after. We found out that the older street vendors who've been there longer have the right to the best trees. You know, so you realize that nature is very important for people in so many ways. We spoke to transgendered people who come to the lake because it gives them a place to sit where they feel like the lake accepts them, even if society doesn't.
So how can we fix this? We can't all live in the woods, but we can change our cities. Layla McCay is a psychiatrist who runs the Centre for Urban Design and Mental Health. It specialises in designing cities to help keep our minds healthy.
One of the recommendations that we have is to try to integrate places for nature, places for socialising and physical activity in the course of people's lives. So it's really great to have a park. But in addition, these little areas where people can leave their desk, walk out and sit down in the air, in nature and chat to each other. In Japan, they have a really interesting thing called machizukuri. The big focus is on nature and designing nature into their neighbourhoods. It's not really about just throwing lots of plants somewhere and hoping for the best. It's really thinking, how can you integrate this into your neighbourhood in a way that really works? Like at the moment, we're sitting on a bench and we're able to see a lot of different greenery, but we're also able to sit and chat comfortably. When you bring the users into the design of spaces, then you can get spaces that work quite well for people's mental health.
Layla says that we can start with some small steps to make things better.
Really, it's about thinking of people's journeys. Where do they go from the moment they wake up and then they commute in and they're in the city and then they're moving around? How can you bring the nature to those people to make sure that they're getting a decent dose just in the course of their daily life? And then, of course, how can we make sure that there's good, affordable, accessible transport to take people out to bigger nature areas like forests and hills?
That's more like it. See the steady smoke?
Yeah.
There's our fire.
Is that it?
Yep. We've got fire.
Yes! I've made fire!
Caveman achievement unlocked.
Yes! Yeah! So quick! Ah! Fantastic! Well done. Well done.
It's way too simplistic to say that nature can cure mental health problems like anxiety. But I can feel the difference when I'm in the forest or even looking at nature. This gives us another treatment to try and another reason to protect the environment around us. This edition of The Y Factor was presented and produced by me, Jordan Dunbar. The researcher was Julia Webster, the editor Richard Knight, and it was mixed by Andy Garrett and Rod Farker.